Hey there, friends. So, full disclosure, I should say I'm doing this video in part to test a new setup I've got going on here. So, bear with me. But in that vein, I had thought about doing this video anyway. So, what I wanted to do is just share with you just a handful of decks from my collection that I've had almost since the beginning of my time as a reader. And that I haven't let go of, but that I nearly never use. I did a couple on Instagram, and I'm going to keep working with them, just, you know, as a way of bringing them out of the closet, so to speak. But it's an interesting thing, because I bought them because I liked them, but they never really became active in my collection. And as I've talked about many times before, I do have a tendency to be somewhat promiscuous with decks. Even my favorite decks, I will frequently put aside for years. I think if you go back to the very early days of my channel, I was using the Shadowscapes a lot, and I love that deck. And now that I say it, it's probably time to bring it out, but I haven't really thought about it in ages. So anyway, here's just some interesting little tidbits. I don't know the in or out of print status for any of these. Well, most of them, but I thought I would share them. So let me just sort of clear the deck here, and I'll start with, I think I've showed all of these at one point or another. I should also say, as a trigger warning for folks who care about this, that none of these are in order as far as I know. If they are, that's a pure accident of fate. But the first one is a really interesting one. This is a very Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and I think it's called Tarot of the New Order. And it was a deck that I got on the Tarot Garden. Let us zoom in a bit here. Oops. I started to zoom in, and I instead stopped recording. This is what this is all about. So this is a really interesting Rider-Waite-Smith clone, and it is very much a clone, because it's sort of a reimagining of Rider-Waite-Smith art. And the reason that I got it was that at the time I was really sort of not in love with the color of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck that I had. And so I found this, and it just really seemed to appeal. So I'll just kind of flip through as I chat. We've got some reversals in here. Maybe I have used this. So I remember using this in a video before, in saying, oh, I think this deck is this language, and was wrong, and someone corrected me, but I think it's Dutch. So you can see that it's very much in the Rider-Waite-Smith vein, very similar. The images are almost identical, but what it did was it reimagined Pamela Coleman Smith's art, and I probably should have looked at these before I did it. And I just liked the color of it, although there are some really interesting recolorations of the deck, of the Pamela Coleman Smith. But, you know, as you can see, it's pretty straight up Rider-Waite-Smith. Now, I don't know if... No, this isn't one of them. There are a couple of the cards that have kind of like really interestingly blue eyeshadow. So there's sort of a draggy element to them. But it's sort of like a pointillist version of Waite-Smith. And there's only a few changes that take it away. Sorry, I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to do this so I can show you and then flip them the right way. So the coloration reminds me a little bit more of gosh, I have this deck somewhere too. It's that really sort of brazenly colored Rider-Waite-Smith deck whose name I'm not going to remember. So yeah, so what let me see if I can find one of the cards that were sort of different. I mean, this is so, Judgment is a little bit different to Pamela Coleman Smith. But again, if you like Rider-Waite-Smith colorations, this is like a really cool one. It's really bright and rich. I'm not gonna... there's a couple of the majors that have different titles. This is one of my favorite cards in Rider-Waite-Smith decks. There's the World's a little bit different. Strength, a little bit different. Like, maybe I'm imagining it. Maybe I am. Anyway, that's it's a deck that I got early on, and I obviously, like most of us, started on a big Rider-Waite-Smith kick, and I really liked this one, and it just sort of never made it into regular use. Oh, it's the Magician, I think, that has the blue eyeshadow. You see that? Yeah, he's a little sort of dragged out. Good for her. So that's one. And I always thought it was an interesting deck. And I just never really reached for it. And I don't know why. I swore there was a retitled major, but whatever. There probably is. Alright, so the next one I'm going to show you is a deck I have used. I just don't use it as much as I should, honestly. Every once in a while, Katie Flowers will bring this deck into a video of hers, and I'm like, oh yeah, I have that deck and I love it, and I don't use it. So this is Stellas Tarot, which I'm fairly sure actually is out of print. But I don't know that it's that hard to get. It's a deck that I would not let go of either. So this is an A.G. Mueller deck. Oh, I kept the little white book for it. I almost never do that. So the backs are this sort of really pretty little thing. It does say Stella on the back. And I can probably zoom in a skosh more for this bad boy, or bad girl. So this is a deck that is like not popular for its borders. Although Katie Flowers did a video and she trimmed the borders and she didn't like it as much. This is a really cool deck, and so I actually just sort of having it here in front of me now, I think I'm going to leave it out to work with, because artistically it's one of my favorites ever. It's Judgment. It's small, it's cool, and the art is really rad. I just really love this deck. I don't remember what made me get it. I don't remember when I got it. It was one of those decks I got and then instantly said, okay, yeah, this is dope. I'm not going to use it much. But it's a deck. I'm glad, and I actually reached for it kind of instinctively, because I didn't, you know, I didn't even consider it as a deck that I would include in this, because I always think, oh yeah, I use that deck. I never do. I've used it maybe in a video or two. I've used it maybe in a reading or two. But it's really cool. It's some of my favorite tarot art ever. There's a weirdness, there's a off-kilteredness to the art in this deck that I love. It's almost staged. There's something very stage-worthy about this deck. And the cardstock's really cool too. So, you know, the borders are a little irritating. At this point, I believe it is out of print, and I probably wouldn't trim it, and again, Katie Flowers did a video where she talked about trimming it, and she didn't really love the trim as much as she thought she would. But so that's Stella's Tarot, and I think that I am going to make this one of my August decks. If you want to see a full walkthrough of any of these, I'd be happy to do that. Oh my god. New tripod, still hitting it. It is not easy to not hit the tripod. So this deck is going to, and it shuffles really good too. That deck. So I'm going to leave this out over here, because we're going to be doing some readings with that this month, faux show. The Cosmic Tarot is next up on our little cavalcade of tarot goodness. And this is a deck I bought really early on, and I got the deck and book set, and I have no idea where the book went, but I was really bad for a long time about keeping books for tarot deck and book sets. And in fact, even today, when I keep them, I'd never read them. Or I do rarely. So this is a really interesting deck, and honestly what made me think of this deck and even this video was that I saw someone at the Reader Studio using it, and I thought, oh, I have that deck somewhere. It's to me weirdly sort of a curiosity. So it's sort of famous for being, here are the backs. Really interesting. It's kind of weirdly famous for being like the movie star deck, because it seems to be that the images were somewhat inspired by classic Hollywood, if I remember correctly. Really sort of influenced by it. And you can kind of see that in the art. It's also an early deck that has a lot of diversity in it, which is nice. I don't know why I don't use it, other than that well, there's a couple cards I don't super love. And I think this deck is more recent. I always think this is like a deck from the 70s. But it's not. It has a 70s vibe to it that I think maybe I don't jive with, but somewhere on here. Yeah, I mean, the copyright is 1998, which is just about the time I started reading. So this would have been a relatively new deck at that point. I started reading maybe 2 or 3 years later, if I'm not mistaken. You know, and looking at it now, I think, oh, why didn't I use this more? I don't think I just got distracted. There's no artistic quality. I really like this tower. I mean, it just sort of reminds me of, like, sort of magical old things. Again, it's a very Waite-Smith deck. But I think one of the things that this deck does successfully, and one reason why it may kind of stay out, is that it has a lot of modernity to it, but it feels also timeless. So it's not a deck that's exclusively modern. There are modern kisses and whispers. Kisses and whispers. But, you know, it doesn't feel like it's super new. It definitely feels like there's a timelessness quality to it. And that's one of the things that I wrestle with when it comes to new decks that have modern images in it. I like the diversity of them. In fact, I'm going to be doing a video at some point this week or weekend about the decks in my collection that are really diverse and that I recommend. But one of the things is that they're all pretty modern, and they just seem like they were, I don't know, they just seem too fresh, like too, I don't know what the word is, unadorned, or I don't know, unadorned is definitely not the word I mean. They just don't have, like, gravitas somehow. And that's my own bias, right? But it just, you know, you expect tarot to have a little bit of age to it. But I really do like this particular one because it seems to stretch a lot of time periods, and the art's really cool. So here's a very sci-fi, classic Hollywood moment. This devil makes me a little uncomfortable. I feel like there's a little bit of, like, historically racial things happening here I won't get into. But, and this is a this is a creepy card. This is not a card for Kelly Fitzgerald. Anyway, so I'm doing more of a walkthrough of this than I intended, but you know, again, it's a U.S. Games deck. This I'm 99.9% sure is still in the Again, it's like, it's good. I mean, I've always liked U.S. Games cardstock, so nothing to complain about there. So again, I think this may, I may leave this sort of in the front of my collection so that it maybe gets some attention. This is a deck I've featured before in other videos. The Cosmic Tarot I've never talked about. Stella I've talked about occasionally. This is a deck I got early on, and it's a Russian deck, or a Polish. I think it's Polish. And I don't use it primarily. So I got the deck, and it was really in rough shape at that point, the box. And the cardstock is very papery, but actually it's, you know, it's kind of like a nice quality to shuffle because it is so papery. Like, there's a lot of give to it, and there's a lot of resistance, so it's a really nice shuffle. Zoom just a skosh more on this one. So it's a Rider-Waite-Smith deck, and it's really unlike anything I've seen before, and that was why I got it. So here's the back. And again, just really lovely art. It does have English and French. And it has kind of a fairy tale quality to it. On the edge of comic book. But I don't even know, you know, again, it's not in English. I remember knowing the name when I got it. But that was many years ago. Many. So, obviously very Rider-Waite-Smith. Very white. Very European. But again, it was a deck. I do not know. I got this from the Tarot Garden, which is where I got a lot of my decks at that point, because this was kind of pre-indie deck revolution. I took a few years away from the online tarot community and from the American Tarot Association and their free reading networks, and even from reading for a while. And where was I going with that? Oh, I don't know. I mean, I guess other than just in that time, I forgot a lot of stuff. Yeah, I have no idea where I was going with that. But, with the memory, I guess. So, and then I started learning about systems that weren't Rider-Waite-Smith, and obviously Marseille, etc. So anyway, but that's an interesting one. It's a cool deck. I don't use it, partly because I don't want to damage it. But it does seem fairly resilient. So, and I have seen this on eBay over the years for not very much. So the next one, the box is falling apart, so obviously I need to find a new box for it. This is kind of a collector's item. I say a lot that I don't have room in my life for collector's items, and that's kind of true. But that one's been with me from the beginning. This next one is another U.S. Games deck. I don't know whether it's out of print or not, but it really is beautiful. It's called the Napo Tarot, created by Betty Lopez and designed by Napo. And I don't have the little white book anymore, so I don't know. The illustrations rendered by famed Argentinian artist Napo. Yeah, there was, you know, when you lose the little white book, you sort of... Is it in there? Oh, no, I didn't lose the little white book. That is so unlike me. And I actually have the art cards, too, which is also very much an unusual thing for me. So I used this the other day. The inspiration for the Napo Tarot is based on Argentinian myth, culture, and history. Just as the man from the Pampas knows what direction to take in the night by reading the stars, so too does the woman from the Pueblo know how to read the archetypal images of the cards with speed and intuition. Good thing we have to gender everything in the world. Women read cards and men go on journeys, right? So, what does this say? The artist Napo was born in Rosario de Santa Fe, Argentina, and began to publish his work and present it in shows beginning in 1959. He has created and illustrated books, games, calendars, posters, puzzles, etc., and has exhibited his work in individual and group shows. Betty Lopez, the author. So it sounds like she wrote the Little White Book, and there may have been a book for this at one time too, and he did the art. Anyway, that's the back, and this is a sort of Thoth-inspired deck, and as such has the esoteric titles on the minors, and anyone who knows me knows that I don't enjoy that because I don't like being told what to do. Are these all upside down? See, I don't use reversals with most decks. I use them with pictorial, I mean with Marseille style pips. So I don't know why everything's so wonkadelic, but here we go. So this is a deck I've always loved the art, and I've just really disliked that the minors have keywords. Or again, not keywords, but the esoteric titles on them, because it's just invasive. Now, I have seen the entire border of this deck trimmed, and it looks good, but because I don't think this is in print anymore, I've been a little angsty about trimming it. On the other hand, as I said to the person who trimmed it, who's the creator of the Tarot des Ozarks, I'm more likely to use it if it's trimmed. So it's a funny thing. But the art is some of my favorite, again, my favorite tarot art. It just makes me really happy. I always do this. I am left-handed, but I turn the deck to the right, and then my hand is always covering it as I do that. These seem to be a little bit more of esoteric of keywords than esoteric titles, so I don't think these match in some cases Crowley. But I did use this today or yesterday, I can't remember. And it's really, I really wish it didn't have them on there. Because I love it, and it's really been, that's the thing, it's those titles that have kept me from using it. But artistically, it's just gorgeous and bright and cool. And I've always loved it. So I did have this up for trade at one point, and no one wanted it, and I've decided I'll probably keep it. I don't know if I'll ever trim it. Or if I'll just deal with it the way it is. There are so many decks, well, by so many I mean, you know, like 3 or 4 I can think of. Tarot of the Spirit seems to be having a moment right now, and it's another one where I've really always loved the art, and I've had that, I probably could have pulled that down and incorporated it into this video, except that it is having kind of a moment right now, so it's not, like, people are seeing it, because I've seen it a lot on Instagram lately. But the Zillick Tarot, which I really love. Even Frida Harris's Crowley deck. I don't like Crowley, but I love her paintings for it. So this next one is an interesting one. It's a large one. This, I believe, is still in print. It's got a different box now, if I'm not mistaken. And the reason I don't use it, it's mostly because of its size. This is another deck that probably could benefit from some trimming. So this is the Inner Child cards. And it came, I think it still does, with a hardcover, really beautifully done book. And I've showed this one before too, because I think it's really beautiful. But again, this deck actually sort of suffers what a lot of schiffer decks suffer from, which is that they're large and they are sticky. So let me zoom in again. So I zoomed out only to zoom in again. So the art is inspired by fairy tales and myths and nature, and they're really large. You can't even see how, I guess you can see how glossy they are. They're not as glossy as schiffer cards, but they are stickier, and they're big. And it's not an easy deck to go and trim, because the tiles on the bottom and then the suit symbol at the top, you'd sort of lose that. So, but the art is really gorgeous, you know, and anyone who grew up with, I'm doing it again, with the, you know, and this, like, could you hear that? Like, they stick. And it's a deck I'll pull out every once in a while, usually to make a video of. Can you hear that? And I'm always surprised that the cards are still sticky. Now, I could try to hit them with some fanning powder. But at this point in my reading life, I can only really imagine using this under certain circumstances. It's really sticky. It really is. But really beautiful. So let me tell you what the suits are. Hearts are cups, swords are swords. Wands are wands. So I think the only difference in the suits is crystals, which is pentacles. And then the majors, sorry, I'm just going through the book. The majors are the Little Red Cap, which is the Fool, Aladdin and the Magic Lamp as the Magician, the Fairy Godmother as the High Priestess, Mother Goose as the Empress, the Emperor as in new clothes as the Emperor, the Wizard as the Hierophant, Hansel and Gretel as the Lovers, Peter Pan as the Chariot, Beauty and the Beast as Strength, Snow White is 11, which would be Justice, Alice in Wonderland is the Wheel, the Midas Touch, oh wait, no, I was doing Snow White is 9, so that's the Hermit. The Midas Touch is 11, which is Justice. So they are fairy tale characters interpreted. But this is a deck I really have always loved and never get rid of, even though I rarely use it because it's so sticky. I wonder if the newer editions of it are quite this bad. I don't know. You can hear the sort of like clickiness of it. So I pull this deck out every once in a while and I'm like, oh, it's probably loosened up. It's not. It's still sticky as always. Anyway, so those are the inner child cards. It's slightly on the edge of Oracle. It's a, you know, I guess people talk about hug decks. I don't really have a hug deck. But I guess if I were really thinking about this one more often, it would probably be this one. It's the Pied Piper. Because I grew up on fairy tale, you know, and not like the Disney stuff. I have, you know, I'm just going to be honest, and I have a little bias against Disney and the Disney princess culture, which I think teaches kids passivity. But, Wizard of Oz. But I read all the classics, and I loved them. And the myths made me happy, and magic. So this deck, again, really early in my reading, I think I probably got this around 1999, 2000, 2001. When did this get published? 1992. Yeah, so I definitely didn't get it at that point because I was very young. But yeah, so these are some decks that what I'm just sort of bringing out and trying to give some air to that have been kind of in the closet, as it were, for for a while. The inner child cards and others. And yeah, that's it. So I hope this was fun to watch, and it was a good opportunity for me to make some mistakes with this camera. And I'll talk to you soon.